What is going on, guys? Today we're talking about used cars. One of the questions I get all the time is, what do I need to look at before I purchase a car? We're going to walk through all the things you should look at and check before you purchase that next used car. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the exterior of the vehicle. You want to make sure you give the vehicle full inspection all the way around. I'm looking at the paint condition, I'm looking at the wheels, the tires, the lights, the windshield, all these different things. So when we talk about paint condition, I want to look at the vehicle preferably on a nice sunny day where I can see all the imperfections of the paint. I want to walk all the way around. I want to look down the side of the vehicle. I can see a good reflection. I'm also looking for any dents, any scratches, anything like that. You can always tell a vehicle that's been well taken care of when it's got a nice shine to it. You know that it's likely been waxed regularly and that paint is probably in pretty good condition. Another thing I'm going to do, especially on an older vehicle like this is actually a 2003 F-150. I want to check for any rust. So oftentimes rust will start down low. So you can always put your hand and run your hand along the bottom of it. Be careful because it can be sharp, but you're feeling if there's any rust starting. A lot of times you will also see bubbles in the paint where the rust is starting. Right in the wheel wells, especially on the beds of trucks, it's oftentimes rust here. And a vehicle like this actually has these guards that run over the top of the wheel wells. Sometimes that will hide the rust. Once again, I want to feel up in here, make sure I don't feel any rust from the backside, make sure I don't see any bubbles in the paint anywhere along this. And actually on this one, if we come right back here, we can see there's a little bit of rust starting. There's some bubbles in the paint right there. You can also see some rust starting to show through. Same thing right back here. This one's not too bad, but it is something that once that rust starts, it's hard to stop without spending a lot of money at a body shop. We move on over here. This is a 2008 Nissan Altima. One thing I want to point out on this is, once again, we're walking all the way around it. We're looking for the chips in the hood, things like that. But you can see the headlight on this one is starting to show a little bit of haze. It's really not a big deal, but it is something to take note of. Got some paint actually peeling. Once this starts happening, once again, that's a sign that may start to get worse quicker. I'm going to go ahead and do my full walk around on this vehicle. Once again, I'm looking for any imperfections. I can see right here, you catch it in the light, there's a pretty good door ding there. So that's something to definitely take note of. And then we can also see right here, that panel is not perfect. It looks like this car actually got against something and somebody polished out the scratches, but there was nothing they could do about the actual dents in the panel. So once again, just be aware of that as you're looking at these vehicles. If it doesn't bother you, then great, you can go ahead and purchase that vehicle. Now, while we're still looking around the outside of the vehicle, this one can actually see, you catch it in the light just right, this thing has seen a hailstorm. So you've got a lot of little dings. Now, that can be fixed, but it is very pricey to do so. Another thing that you can look for is any indication that the car has maybe been painted or had some work done. This car in particular, you can see somebody tried to do some sanding up here, and actually they had some overspray on this window as well that I can see. So that would be an indication that maybe I need to ask some questions about what happened to this car. Another really good way to tell how good a vehicle has been taken care of is look at the areas that are hard to access, hard to reach. See what the paint condition is there. So on a truck like this, for instance, I definitely want to look at the paint on top. If it looks like it's in good condition, has been cared for, that probably means the previous owner went the extra step to take care of those hard to reach areas, and they didn't neglect them. When we're talking about vehicles, especially cars that are lower to the ground, I always want to look at the front end of it, look at the front bumper. That's oftentimes where you'll see all your rock chips. If there's going to be any clear coat that's peeling, a lot of times that's where it starts. On this vehicle, we can actually see that starting right here. So once that starts, the only way to fix that permanently is to have that bumper repainted, so just keep that in mind. Now, while we are still looking at the exterior of the vehicle, I definitely want to take a look at the wheels. On a truck or something with larger tires, it's not as prone to happen, but on cars especially, I want to look around the lip of the entire wheel to see if that wheel has been rubbed up against curbs, see if it's got a bunch of scratches and gouges in it. This one looks pretty good. Once again, this is a truck, not as prone. We'll go take a look at the cars. Now, once again, looking at the car, I'm going to look around all the edges of the wheel, make sure there's no big scratches or gouges. You want to make sure that you do this on all four wheels. Usually the front are the wheels that are most likely to get rubbed against a curb, but if the tires have been properly rotated, that wheel that used to be on the front is now going to be on the back. Another thing that's good to check is the front and the rear bumper. These are going to be the components that get rubbed on something, or somebody backs into another vehicle. That's where it's going to show the signs of that. So we want to make sure there's no scratches or dents in the front bumper. This one looks good. We can come do the exact same thing on the car. Now, you can see on this one, it's rubbed up against something right there. The rest of it looks pretty good. We can go to the back bumpers. Looks pretty good on this vehicle, and then on this car as well. Now, the final exterior check I'm going to do is to look at the glass. So you want to make sure, of course, there's no big scratches or chips, cracks, anything like that in any of the glass, especially the windshield. The windshield is usually where you'll see it. On this vehicle, we've got a little chip in the windshield. Now, that doesn't look bad right now, but there's a good chance, if it hasn't been properly repaired, that later on could turn into a crack, which would cause the windshield to need replaced. Now, if you're still looking at this vehicle, that means the exterior has passed all your tests and you're still interested. So the next thing we want to move on to is more of the mechanical side of things. Now, we'll get into that a little further, but first I want to talk about tires. Tires can be replaced, but they are expensive. So be sure to inspect all four tires on the vehicle to make sure that there's no funny wear. You want to make sure the tread is even all the way across, front, back, all four wheels. Or if the tires are worn out, just keep that in mind and know that you're going to need to put tires on that vehicle. Another thing to keep in mind is if you do see the tires are worn funny. So if one side is worn out and the other side is not, then that is a good sign that you have an issue either with the alignment or the front end. It could be tie rods, could be pitman arm. Any front end component could be loose, causing those tires to wear out. Now we move on to the actual mechanical components of the vehicle. So when I open this hood, first thing I want to come over and take a look at is just this battery. It's pretty simple. Just want to make sure there's not a bunch of corrosion on the terminals. But then what I can also do is I can look right here, and it actually shows me that that battery is from 2019. So I know when it was replaced. Battery life varies drastically, but if it's been replaced in the last year or two, there's a good chance that battery is still going to have some life left in it. Now, if you run into a battery, you know, that's 5-6 years old, you're probably going to have to replace it fairly soon. The next thing is I'm going to come over to my washer fluid. Now, washer fluid, of course, can just be refilled, but I always like to take the cap off and make sure that there's fluid in there. And the reason I do this is these tanks are notorious for getting a crack or hole in them. So if you open this thing up and it's completely dry, there's a chance that that tank is bad, and that it would need replaced before your washers would work. next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come and check all my fluids. So newer vehicles oftentimes do not have a way to check the transmission fluid easily. Newer vehicles oftentimes don't have power steering fluid, but any of the fluids that I can check, I want to do that. On this vehicle here, we've got a transmission fluid dipstick right here. Now the engine needs to be running before you check that transmission fluid, but I just want to look at it, make sure it's not completely black, make sure it doesn't smell burned, and also make sure that the level is correct. Next, I'm going to come over and check the engine oil. Dipstick is right here. Engine needs to be off to check the engine oil. But same thing, I just want to look at the fluid condition, but I especially want to pay attention to that level. If you've got a low oil level, there's a good chance that that vehicle might have an oil consumption problem. From there, I will look at my power steering fluid level. This one you can see right on the side, it's full. If it was low, once again, you may have an issue with a power steering pump leak. I can come over here, my brake fluid is full. Once again, if it was low, that would maybe indicate an issue. And then the final thing is I want to come check my coolant. Now you want to be careful. If the engine is hot, you don't want to remove this. This engine is cold, so I can go ahead and remove it. I want to look at my fluid. Once again, look at my level, but then I also want to look at my condition. Coolant, sometimes if you see a milky, oily looking coolant, there's a good chance that that vehicle might have a head gasket problem, something along those lines. You want to make sure that coolant is nice and clean and at the correct level. The final thing I recommend checking when you have the hood open is just go ahead and inspect that engine all the way around. Look at the valve covers, look at the front, look at the belt, make sure the belt doesn't have a lot of cracks in it, but I'm just looking to make sure there's no fluid leakage anywhere in the engine compartment. If there is fluid leakage, it tells you that there's an issue with that system. Just for reference, I want to show a car as well. So we've got our engine oil here we can check. This is actually a sealed transmission, so we are not able to check the fluid level of the transmission. Once again, here's our washer tank, our coolant tank. See the level right on the side. Our brake reservoir, we can check the fluid level there. And then I can come here and look at my battery. Go ahead and make sure it's not corroded, see what the date code of it is. Now that we've checked under the hood, we want to go ahead and look underneath this vehicle. I always recommend that when you're going to look at a used car, wear something that you don't mind getting a little dirty. You may have to lay on the ground to look underneath the vehicle. First thing we'll do is come under the front of the vehicle. Now what I'm looking for down here is to make sure nothing has been rubbing on the ground, nothing is hanging down low. I'm looking behind each wheel to make sure there's no fluids or greases. I'm also looking for any indication that coolant or an oil is leaking from underneath the vehicle. We can then come in from the side and do the same thing. Make sure there's nothing leaking or anything out of place. On a rear wheel drive vehicle, we'll go ahead and look at that rear differential to make sure it's not leaking as well. The next step would be to go to all four corners and we want to look at the brakes. So I want to look at this brake rotor. I just want to make sure there's not any big scrapes in it. Make sure it doesn't look like the brakes are completely worn out on this vehicle. You can come over here and sometimes you're able to look in and see the brake pad, which will tell you how much life you have left in those brakes. Once again, we're going to do the same thing on the rear. Now, brakes are not a huge issue. If you need brakes, they can be done fairly inexpensive, but it is something, once again, just to keep in mind. Next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that all the doors, trunks, anything like that work. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the doors up, make sure they work, make sure they close nice and smooth. Do that for all the doors. Right along with the doors, I want to make sure that all my windows roll down. I want to make sure that my lock actuators work on both sides. Make sure my windows all roll all the way down, as well as all the way up. Next step is going to be inspect the inside of the vehicle. I'm looking at the seats, make sure there's no rips or tears, how clean it is, floorboards, seats, everything. I want to inspect the dash for any cracks, any imperfections there. Gonna get in the vehicle. I'm gonna go ahead and start it up, make sure it starts correctly. Then I'm looking at it to make sure it idles correctly, make sure it's not really rough, make sure there's no check engine lights, ABS lights, anything that'll give you indication that there is an issue with that vehicle. After that, I want to come over, I'm going to turn my headlights on, I'm going to get out of the vehicle, make sure those headlights work. I want to check the blinkers. Once again, I'll get out of the vehicle and check front and rear on both sides to make sure that it works. Next, we can come over here to our radio, test everything there. If it's got a CD player, make sure that works. But the really important part is we want to make sure the air conditioner works. So we'll turn the AC on, make sure it gets cold. But then also, you want to make sure that that heater works. So what you can do is we'll go panel, we'll turn it all the way to hot. Now even if it's really hot outside, I want to make sure this heater works, make sure my heater core is not plugged up, make sure I'm not going to have issues when it does turn cold. Now if you're test driving a truck or a vehicle that's four-wheel drive, during the test drive you want to pull into a parking lot or some kind of area where you can put that vehicle into 4 high, into 4 low, make sure that the four-wheel drive works correctly. So now our vehicle is ready for a test drive. I want to go ahead and start the vehicle up. Sometimes I'll even shut the vehicle off and start it up a couple different times to make sure there's not issues with that battery or the starter. Once again, I'm looking at my dash, make sure I have no check engine lights or anything along those lines. But then I also, as I'm driving this vehicle, I want to watch the odometer to make sure it is working correctly, to make sure that the mileage on this car is truly correct. Now once I get that engine started, I want to go ahead and jump out before we go on our test drive. Make sure I don't hear anything funny. So what I'm listening for is any weird noises, any knocks, any squeaks, anything that sounds like a bad bearing, anything like that. So now we're in the vehicle, we've got the vehicle started, we've already verified all the lights work, air conditioner works, the radio works, there's no dashboard lights on. I want to go ahead and rev the engine up a little bit just to make sure it's running all right. I'm going to go ahead and put the vehicle through the gears, make sure there's no weird sounds, no clunking noises, and no real delays when you put that vehicle in gear. This one seems all right. Now we're gonna go ahead and put our seatbelt on. It's a good thing to check, make sure that works. Do this for all the seatbelts, but go ahead and make sure it clicks in good, but then also make sure that it retracts. Sometimes the retractors will go bad in these. Now we're ready for our test drive. Go ahead and put the vehicle in reverse, make sure everything works in reverse like it should. Once again, no funny noises, anything like that. Put it in drive. Now we're off on our test drive. So I'm actually on a really rough road right now. It's a dirt road. I like to do this because then it lets me listen to the suspension. As we hit these bumps, I want to make sure I don't hear anything that's loud, make sure that the car's not really bouncy, like the suspension needs work. We can kind of go back and forth, make sure the steering works well, and then we'll go ahead and continue the test drive. Now it's always good to put the vehicle in lots of different scenarios when you're on your test drive. Drive through some neighborhoods at slow speed, Make sure there's no shakes, make sure the steering wheel's nice and straight, make sure it doesn't need an alignment, whether there's issues with tires, you know, a bent wheel that you can feel. Like, once again, we're just listening for those weird noises, anything weird that the vehicle's going to do. I also want to take the vehicle out on the highway. I want to go highway speeds. I want to make sure there's no issues at high speeds as well. While we're cruising right here, I'm going to go ahead and set my cruise, make sure the cruise works. Appears to be working like it should. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull into a parking lot, and I want to check the brakes. I want to speed up, hit the brakes really hard, make sure they work like they should. This one seems good. Especially if you hit the brakes hard enough, whether there be a little gravel or you're on a dirt road or something, and that ABS kicks on, that's a good sign. That tells me that my ABS is working properly. Make sure the brake pedal is not spongy, things like that. Another good thing to do is to test the transmission. When you're driving along, go ahead and give it a lot of gas. Make the transmission downshift a couple gears. Make sure that it doesn't slip. Make sure that your RPMs don't just jump up and the car doesn't move. Make sure it doesn't shift hard. Things like that are all good indications that that transmission is in good health. Another good tip is anytime you're test driving a car, turn the radio off. You don't need to hear the music. You want to listen to the car, you want to listen to the engine, suspension. You want to be able to hear if there's anything going on before you purchase that car. You want to put on the brakes, listen for any abnormal noises while you're braking. I like to do a few slow accelerations, a few hard accelerations. Just run it through its paces, things that you're going to do in a normal day, merging onto the highway, things like that. You want to make sure that you run it through as much of a test as you can before you commit to purchasing that vehicle. If you didn't notice anything on your test drive, and you didn't notice anything on in your pre-inspection, then great. Sounds like you might have found your next car. Now, if you're not familiar with cars, anytime you can, I do recommend that you just go ahead and take that vehicle to your mechanic, somebody that you trust, to put it up on a lift and actually do a full inspection on it. But if that's not an option for you, then this is a good walkthrough on how to check the vehicle before you buy it. Now, a lot of the things that we talked about are not necessarily things that would make it where you shouldn't purchase the car. It's just you need to be aware that things may need attention or parts may need replaced. It might need tires, things like that. This is just a good overview of simple things to check that anyone can check when they go to look at a used car. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We do a lot of car related things, and I'll catch you next time.